Welcome back. I'm David Gura. More fallout this afternoon from the firing of former FBI Director Andrew McCabe. Using Twitter, President Trump questioned reports. McCabe kept notes on his conversations with the president and delivered them to special counsel Robert Mueller. The president tweeted, "Spent very little time with Andrew McCabe, but he never took notes when he was with me. I don't believe he made memos except to help his own agenda, probably at a later date." Same with lying James Comey. Can we call them fake memos? Well, joining me now is NBC News military analyst, retired four-star Army General Barry McCaffrey. General McCaffrey, I want to begin with a tweet you fired off a couple of days ago. It got a lot of play, caused quite a stir. I'll read it here. "Reluctantly, I have concluded that President Trump is a serious threat to U.S. national security. He's refusing to protect vital U.S. interests from active Russian attacks. It's apparent that he is, for some unknown reason, under the sway of Mr. Putin." You said all that in 246 characters. I'll give you a little time to expound upon that. It came on the heels of reporting that Russians had been able to infiltrate a lot of infrastructure here in the U.S.
Well, David, look, it was almost the final straw, the attempted assassination by Russian intelligence agents using a signature chemical agent that the Russians had developed during the 70s. It was as if Putin finally was saying, "I'll come murder people wherever they are on the face of the earth if they oppose me." He's doing the same thing inside Russia, of course, but he's been a consistent, significant threat to NATO and U.S. national security interests. In Syria, there was actually an armed attack by Russian mercenaries on U.S. forces. In Afghanistan, he's encouraging the opposition to U.S. NATO presence. In eastern Ukraine, in the Baltic states, threatening us overtly with nuclear weapons. We haven't heard language like that during the Cold War. And thankfully, Secretary Mattis, the UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, H.R. McMaster, the former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, all did speak up about U.S. national interests, but not the president. What is he doing? He must, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the Intelligence Service, protect us.
Let me ask you about a custom. It is custom after a big election somewhere in the world for the President of the United States to call up the victor of that election. I imagine President Trump is thinking about whether or not to do that after the election today, presuming that Vladimir Putin, as expected, wins that election in Russia. Help me understand the calculus there. Should President Trump reach out, call Vladimir Putin, presuming he wins that election?
Of course not. This is a sham election. You know, one of the problems President Trump has had is he's attacked the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He refused to shake hands with Angela Merkel in the Oval Office. He's attacked the Mexican government, the Canadian Prime Minister, but he's been very supportive of, President for Life Xi in China, of Duterte in the Philippines, of Erdogan in Turkey. He has been outreach to strongmen, to dictators. Of course, we shouldn't legitimize this election in Russia. The Russian people are the first victims of Putin's criminal oligarchy.
Last question, just about what happened with Andrew McCabe. I'm going to point here to an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that just came out today. They asked folks to weigh in on major political figures and institutions, and one of them was the FBI. Very positive reaction to that. 48% rather had a positive reaction to that. Negative was 20. That is a 28-point differential. Something that Andrew McCabe said, General, after he was fired was he's just a small part of this. He's worried about this attack on law enforcement generally. How founded do you think those claims are? How worried are you about morale or the regard of law enforcement, including the FBI in this country?
Well, look, the actual McCabe firing, we need to find out what the FBI Inspector General report was, what the OPR said actually happened before we come to a conclusion on him personally. But look, having said that, I've got a lot of experience dealing with the FBI and talking to big audiences. I say, thank God for the FBI. They are almost impossible to corrupt. The only other institution like that's a Coast Guard, for God's sake. So it's important for us. And by the way, we do have civil service protections for the, we don't have a president come in and fire everybody in the government as they do in some autocratic states. So we got to be very careful on this. But the FBI is a national treasure. It needs to be supervised, obviously, but we need to take great pride in the women and men are across the country right now protecting us from terrorist incidents and organized crime.
All right, some kind words there from the retired Army General about the Coast Guard. General Barry McCaffrey, thank you very much for the time this afternoon. I appreciate it, as always.
Good to be with you, David.
Breaking news from Russia as the presidential election polls have closed.